Welcome back, Doug Pagitt Radio, 12:21, 21 minutes after high noon around here on May 1st, May Day. Beautiful May Day. It's already May.
Yes.
For those who've been worrying about how they're going to pay their mortgage in May, I'm sorry to tell you it's May.
Right. Just one more month and spring will be here in Minnesota.
And if it comes on a weekend this year, it's going to be really good news.
Yeah.
I've noticed it's been a tough weather year all around the country.
Yes.
It has been tough everywhere. Really bad news this last week from Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, Alabama. Hundreds of people dying in tornadoes.
Yeah.
You know, there are people that when tragedy strikes of the natural kinds, they ask, is this somehow God's judgment?
Yeah.
So I remember 5-6 years ago when the floods were happening in New Orleans.
Yeah.
There were people suggesting that perhaps that was God's judgment on the lifestyle of the people living in New Orleans.
Sure.
And then when a tornado struck here in Minneapolis, there were theologians who were suggesting that maybe the religious conversation that was going on around homosexuality in the Lutheran Church is what caused the tornado to come and the lightning to strike.
Yeah.
You wonder if those same people think that maybe the religion of conservative Alabama was at play. But I don't think so. But I've been thinking about conservatives this week because I had an empathetic moment.
Yeah,
and here's how it goes.
So weird.
I was in a conversation with my rabbi. And in a conversation with my rabbi, Joseph Edelheit, I gained a whole new appreciation, understanding, and empathy for a particular guy named Al Mohler.
Oh, right, yeah.
Al Mohler is the president and the leader of the Southern Baptists.
Yeah.
Now, what makes them Southern now is not what made them Southern before. Previously, Southern all had to do with states' rights, had to do with the Civil War, had to do with slavery, and so on. Now it's just sort of a title. It's just sort of so you have Southern Baptists that don't just live in the southern part of the United States. They're all around. Right. They're all around the world, frankly. But they are a particular tribe. Here's what happened in my conversation with the rabbi. Let me tell you a little story. I'm talking with Rabbi Joseph Edelheit, and he has a particular opinion that if you're going to be religious, then you need to pick that you're either going to be a Jew or you're going to be a Christian. But you don't get to be some hybrid of the two. And, you know, he's a guest here on this show once a month, and we have this ongoing conversation. What is Judaism? And he has a particular opinion that would say, if you're going to be a Christian, then you're going to proclaim and believe and have a set of practices that make you distinctly Christian as opposed to being Jewish. So on our Thursday night Torah teaching that we do together, I was asking him, Joseph, why do you feel that that's so important? I was pushing him theologically on this.
Yeah.
I was pushing him on how come someone can't be Jewish and Christian? Why is it that you say that that's not quite possible? Because it seems to me that there were people early on who were followers of Jesus and were Jewish, clearly, and then Christianity starts to develop as its own expression within the non-Jewish community. But you had people whose parents are one and parent is a Jew and one parent is a Christian. How come you have to choose? And he's very particular about this. He just says you have to, and then we get into our conversation. As a good friendship can allow this to develop, he begins to say to me, well, because here's why. Because for Jewish people, what's at risk is that we might not exist. And I had never really thought about that a lot.
Yeah.
I know he often will bring up that in our 20th century history, we have an intentional act of nations to try to eliminate the Jews, that currently there is rhetoric in certain capitals and certain religious systems that would want to bring about the end of the Jews and all this. And so he's quite sensitive to that. And he said, when you are 1% of the population, and you start to hear other people saying, well, maybe you being distinct isn't so important, you start to get worried.
Sure.
Now, that was fresh for me. I mean, I understood the idea, sort of cognitively. But when he said it, it sort of washed over me. And I thought, I think you're onto something here. So what his big concern was, Rabbi Joseph Edelheit, was, well, if I'm ever engaged with a Christian who doesn't believe that it's important for me to exist as a Jew and it's important for Judaism to exist, I get really afraid of them. Now he starts to have an existential worry. Existential is kind of fancy philosophy talk for your actual lived experience being around, that you are going to survive.
Yeah.
So it's an existential fear that he has, that he may not survive. So his fear, the fear that Joseph had was, well, as a small minority population that the world has ganged up on before, I think it's really important that the distinctives that make us us are preserved. So I said, now that's a lot to think about. So I suggested, so perhaps what you're saying is that my freedoms to be more blended need to be taken into consideration of my friend who feels the need to be sure that his way is preserved.
Yeah.
So it's like the parents, the first generation of immigrants into any country that start to say, but what about the traditions that we've brought here? Well, here's how this then connects me to Al Mohler.
Okay.
And other conservatives, because I'm reading in Time magazine, and Al Mohler is making comments about the writings of a friend of mine. So I was being a little defensive. Mm-hmm. I was being a little careful. Al Mohler says things like this: theologically, this Rob fella he's talking about, theologically, it's disastrous. Any of us should be concerned when a matter of theological importance is played with in a subversive way. I'm thinking, see, that's the way these guys always are. They just never want any new thoughts. They never want anything new. They just want to sit on top of it. And then here comes the empathy after listening to my conversation with Joseph. Back to Al Mohler. Al Mohler says, when you adopt universalism, when you adopt universalism and erase the distinction between the church and the world, then you don't need the church, and you don't need Christ, and you don't need the cross. Instead of hearing that as theological boundaries, it struck me, I heard it instead as existential boundaries.
Sure.
If he's right, then the church has no place. And I have identified myself as having meaning in this world in connection to churches existing and being meaningful. If you take that away, then there's no place for me. All of a sudden, a guy can understand that. A guy can understand how when someone's doing subversive things and they're starting to fear for their very survival of how they understand themselves. Maybe not their life is going to be taken, but the significance of their life is going to be taken away. Now you start to understand that what people fear is loss.
Yeah.
So it really created a sense of empathy for me, in me, for people that I think, well, maybe when I'm being provocative, maybe for some people it frees them from the chains that they felt that they're under, but for someone else, it feels as if it threatens the very thing that gives them significance and gives them meaning. Huh? What do you think?
Well, I don't think I'm there yet.
Yeah, you just don't grant people that. Boy.
Well, like you've had you've had a theological conversation with a rabbi. I mean, you're just throwing this on me right now.
But you had a theological conversation with me.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if it was anybody else but Al Mohler, I don't know. I mean,
really?
Some of the stuff, I don't.
But doesn't it make more sense if people say that kind of stuff? If people say what you sort of like makes your head spin and you think, are you the super crazy?
Well,
maybe that's the kind of stuff people say when they feel like they're under threat of their very existence no longer having significance.
Oh, I think, I don't know. I think maybe you're taking it a little too far. I mean, I don't know. It's like.
Well, I think that's how it goes. Doug Pagitt Radio. I think
that's how it goes. Doug Pagitt Radio.
That's how we talk about it right here, no matter what the sidekick tells you. No, we're going to come back after the break. We'll talk about this a little bit more. Let's talk about this on AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, and DougPagittRadio.com, and over there on Facebook as well. Stick with us. We'll chat about this a little more.